In times when people scream in order to be heard, we must relearn constructive discourse, especially about the things that hurt. We must understand what it really takes to heal. We are going to tell our stories of mental health from our perspective and not from the perspective of stigma. Here we invite our angels and our demons to the table because listening to what their stories have to teach us allows us to grow. In the Treehouse, we are safe in our vulnerability. In our vulnerability, we are unstoppable.
That we have Abby Crisafulli, a very prominent member of school growing up. I want to say that she was my friend, but I also feel like she was kind of in a class above me because Abby was one of the smartest, one of the hardest working. She's just if I could just say it candidly, I would not mess with Abby Crisafulli. She is hardcore and driven, and I'm really honored to have you on today. So good morning.
Good morning, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So I wanted to ask, when we originally met and talked about this, doing an episode together, last night I was thinking, I just wanted to ask you, what were your thoughts walking away from that night and the few days leading after? What bubbled up in your mind and in your heart and in your gut?
So many things. We talked for 2 hours, I think, that day. So, we got through a lot. I think what I really walked away with, though, and what has been kind of coming back to me over and over again has just been the last thing you said was, if it helps one person, why wouldn't you do it? Yeah. And so that, when we talk about these kinds of things, like, it definitely can be anxiety ridden, it can bring on nerves, that kind of thing. But that singular idea of making this okay and making this more accessible to people is so much bigger than our individual fights, I think. If we're in a healthy enough place to talk about it.
Yes. So
I think that is just a really powerful sentiment that has been sticking with me for sure. And just how much I appreciate what you're trying to do. We haven't had the chance to really connect much since school. So getting for that to kind of be like our reintroduction conversation, and for you to be willing to share like this journey that you're on and where you've come from and what's been going on in your life was really helpful for me to be comfortable in what I've gone through and where I am now, and kind of taking the time to sit and think about that has been a lot of work, and that's been a lot of time, and appreciating that part of it too is just as important.
Yeah, there was something you said at one point. I think I was regaling how just powerful you are to me, and talking about where we kind of find ourselves now. And I just remember you stopping and you said, Ryan, hold on. What you see here and what you hear right now is 15 years of self-work, 15 years of figuring out what is actually in me and what I am ready to say to the world. Because listening to your story about your past, and this is one of the reasons we came together to talk today, is talking about the influence that our loved ones have on our upbringing, and how my mind's going into it now, but how we grow up in this environment, developing these sets of beliefs about ourselves, and we're interfacing with the world and other people dealing with other things. And, we go to people's houses and we see behaviors that maybe seem really alien or not. But there we are trying to figure out how what we believe is so true and what we feel is interacting with other people. And then I think there comes a point where something happens and you start to wonder, whoa, is what I believe what exactly am I trying to say here? I felt like there came a point where everything that I thought I knew got challenged to its core. Mm-hmm. And it felt like that challenged me to my core because I was those beliefs. So that's what I was, just like you said, reconnecting after so long. I was fascinated by how much I didn't know about you and the environment you grew up in. And I want to hear about that. I want to know how those beliefs started interfacing with the world and how your idea of yourself began to change as those interactions got more and more intense.
Yeah. Okay. So it's an interesting thing to go back into your memories and your brain and try to figure out, like, where does it start, you know? Because I think it is our whole journey that, you know, we're little sponges and we absorb things. And I think I'm a person particularly who absorbs pretty much everything that I come into contact with. And so knowing as a very, very young kid, like I was very confident, very outgoing, super active kid, and just really sure of who I was. And I would say starting like late elementary school, some of that started to erode away. And definitely not something I noticed at the time, you know, when you're 9 or 10.
Right.
I didn't have that much self-awareness to like realize that changes were happening like that.
Sure.
And then, you know, into middle school, there's all the typical middle school things. I was super lucky in that I had incredible friends at that point. So for me, middle school was like the better part. And then high school was like where things really took a turn, which is sometimes can be opposite for some folks. But
yeah.
In 8th grade, one of my best friends, it was me and 2 other people, and she ended up moving, and that really hit me hard. And it started to just like kind of take over my emotional state a lot of the time. I was just really sad that she was gone. I wasn't sure what that meant because that was my first big like cut off from like childhood or early childhood at least. And so it started having an impact with my really close friends, and I just started to kind of withdraw from them. And I would say that's kind of like the first memory I had that I noticed something was different. And then moving into high school, I think I told you this, like came home from first day of high school crying, didn't really get better since then, or throughout high school, I should say. And so with that, I think it was just like this really, really struggling with self-confidence and really struggling with like, who am I now? And what does this all mean? And who can I trust? What is stability? Like all of those kinds of questions.
Oh, that just hit me in the chest. What is stability? What was it about the first day of high school that felt so big?
It was, I think it, as a natural kind of life transition point, I feel those moments pretty strongly anyway, just kind of naturally. And then it was like something really dumb. It was like a sophomore who like bumped me in the hallway and was like laughing about it with his friends or something, you know, just like pretty trivial. But I think in that moment, it just hit me in the wrong spot. And it just like kind of made me start to question all of these things. And I think that's something that's actually really important with what I've started to learn now, and kind of unpacking a lot of this stuff is just like, you truly never know like what the one thing is going to be that impacts somebody, because we all react to things differently.
Well, and what you said about, some sophomore bumping into you and laughing about it with his friends as being trivial, that could be looked at as trivial, but I feel like on a day where we basically are stripped of all our layers going into a new school, new people, new level of responsibility, it's front loaded so hard. You're going into high school. This is setting you up for the rest of your life. Don't fuck up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're just stripped raw. And then all of a sudden, some jerk off not paying attention bumps into you. That's huge, because we're already in a state where it feels really vulnerable, because all the things we know are just gone. We're in a new building, new faces, new smells. We've got a schedule. And there is someone who doesn't care about your space or isn't even aware. I think that's what struck me that hurts about things like that, is people not paying attention or feel like they don't need to tune in to how their behavior is affecting other people,
Mm-hmm.
let alone individuals. I mean, you bump into somebody now, you're probably going to end up talking to the cops just with how charged people are. So no, I don't want to say that that's trivial. That's huge, and I want to go back and confront that guy and say, hey, watch your step, because I'm broad. I'm like 4 feet wide at the shoulder, and I pay a lot of attention to not bumping into people, because I'll knock stuff over.
Yeah. And us short people appreciate you for that.
It's like the Princess Bride. Get out of the way. Everybody move. Anybody want a peanut?
Oh, wow. You have the perfect voice for it, Ryan.
Thank you, Andre the Giant, for making a little cameo in our episode today. I didn't expect that. Okay, so I went off a little bit there, but
Yeah.
we were talking about transitioning and becoming aware of our own emotional state
Mm-hmm.
and mental state. And you were talking about the first day of high school being difficult and it really not stopping from there. Where did it go from there?
So I would say through the first 2 years, freshman year, I lost one of my uncles. And that was the first time that I really dealt with losing somebody who I wasn't ready for.
What was his name?
John. Yeah.
John Crisafulli?
John Simpson, actually.
Ooh, all right.
Yeah. But he passed kind of unexpectedly, and it hit my mom really hard. Mm-hmm. And that was something that was really difficult for me to see. And I think I started sort of internalizing what I thought she was going through and taking that on as my own to some extent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so with that, and then just continue, like brain chemistry changes and all of those things that kind of compile on at the same time. Really just put me right into depression for a long time. And so I would say like the middle of high school, junior year of high school was probably the worst.
Yeah.
And it just was, I got so wrapped up in all these things that I was thinking that it was just like, I am the problem. Like this is centered around me for some reason. It's something that I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's causing hurt and pain to everybody I love.
Yeah.
And when you don't have, and that's not language I would be able to have used at that point. Like I can articulate that now in this way. So like without even having the language to talk about it, when you're in it, it's even harder to dig yourself out. And so it caused, like obviously I was starting to withdraw from people. I was hiding what I was feeling from friends, with family. We didn't really talk about it outright, and it was causing a lot of tension, which again, then I started to internalize of like, I'm causing pain to my family.
Yeah.
Like, this is something that I'm doing. And so, yeah, that lack of language was really tricky to navigate. And I didn't really.
Right. That part about taking on the feeling of responsibility for our loved one's emotional state is
Mhm.
so huge for me, because that part about feeling like it's my fault when other people around me are upset is a very, very, very important part. I If I could go back and, kneel down in front of my younger self and say, hey, your mom's emotional state is not your responsibility. Your father's emotional state is not your responsibility. Your friend's emotional state is not your responsibility. I, just like you said, I probably wouldn't know what I was talking about, but I'm resonating with my memories of how, when I began internalizing the pain of those around me, and
Mhm.
how I continued to drive that stake into my chest and basically removed everything. The things that made the most sense was for me to just remove myself, because it was like, well, do I bring it up and scare everybody? Or because the other thing too, I felt like I was reacting to was simply people's reactions to me or reactions to their own life. So if I did something that maybe happened to trigger someone and they got really angry, because one thing I know now is I feel like I can feel when someone's really angry at me versus when someone's really angry and they're basically aiming it at me. But I
Yeah.
didn't know that back then. So when somebody was angry, I was just like, I made them angry, or
Yeah.
I'm not doing enough to make them not angry. That
Mhm.
was it for me. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough to make people happy. I'm not doing enough to make people. And just like you said, on top of feeling the weight of what was hurting me, on top of just developing and figuring out, because when we're young, all this new sensory stimulation is coming in and we're trying to make sense of it all. So if we have these feelings of heaviness or pain in us and we're looking through those things, it I feel like it can start compounding really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's just like you said, I was like the last person to surface with my head above the water and see that I was drowning.
Mhm.
And it was like everybody's got their stuff figured out. Everybody somehow has something that I don't, because it just seems like everybody's fine and they don't want to talk about these things. It must be me. It must be me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, it's funny, like with the very lovely, wonderful intro that you gave me of having it together. Like this is the same time of life that we're talking about. And like,
Mhm.
I didn't, and I was a mess on the inside, but nobody knew.
Mhm.
And that was a couple of people knew. I had two teachers who were incredible and kind of saw through what was going on, but
Yeah.
like the people closest to me, like truly had no idea until like our mid 20s when I kind of went back and explained it to them. But
Mhm.
and that's the thing is like you don't know who it is.
Mhm.
Some people might wear it on their sleeve and like they might be trying to ask for help in the
Mhm.
best way that they can. Others, like for you and me, like we didn't talk about it, we didn't ask about it, we just
Mhm.
figured it was our problem, and I just have to figure this out or it's going to make it bad for other people.
Mhm.
And that's the thing, like I was high academic or high achieving academic. I was in all the clubs, I was in sports, I was in all the things that you're supposed to do when you're in high school that we
Mhm.
think we're supposed to do.
Right.
And those were amazing experiences and those were really positive in a lot of ways, but it also helped me hide.
Yeah. Oh, that's big. I was talking to a friend of mine once, and it was at this leadership intensive that I went to for a week, and it was literally the last day, and we're about to get on the bus, And she hit me with something, because during that week, I stepped out. I've always been, at the front of the line, like ready to shoulder the weight, to lead. I'll jump into the fire first. That's always who I've been. And I did that during this week. And at the very end, she hit me with something that it was like I was there for a whole week, right? And then the last 30 seconds was what just drove right into my mind. And I was just like, oh. She said, well, do you go out in front like that so that you can be alone because you feel like you're too much? And I just thought about that. Even the things that we feel we're supposed to be doing, the things that, society says makes us strong, makes us attractive, makes us worth people's time, are the things that we distract ourselves with.
Yeah.
And just that shift in thought from this is what I'm supposed to do to this is drowning me. I just feel like that's, again, something I wish I could tell myself is, hey, pay attention to all this, because I was just sitting quietly this morning, and this old saying came into my mind about, because I think today we'll talk a little bit, or we'll talk a lot about how our family structure just influences us. And there was a saying that I read once upon a time, and I just wanted to share it today because I feel like it might segue into that. But it said something along the lines of, if you criticize a child and make them wrong, they won't stop loving you. They'll stop loving themselves. And I just feel like there's so much that goes into telling kids the way they're supposed to be and what's okay and what's not, that they don't actually have a chance to learn how to first unpack what they're feeling and how the stimulus is affecting them, let alone like getting into that and being able to process it, because it's not okay to begin with. So that's what I want to just break. I want that system gone. I want kids to grow up taking incoming stimulus and asking themselves, how is this affecting me? Not how am I supposed to react to this?
Yeah, that's huge. It's making me think too of the shame culture that we have, especially around mental health. And you mentioned a leadership conference that you did. I did a similar, they kind of branded it as like a social justice training retreat thing that I did in college. And we were going through this identity exercise and trying to understand privileges in each of the identities, what all the identities are. And ability is one of those identities.
Ooh, interesting.
And to me, turns out I had a very limited understanding of what ability versus disability or differently abled meant at that time, especially. And like depression and mental health were listed under disabilities. And in that moment, I just burst into tears and could not stop crying. And this was a room full of strangers that I had just met. It was a 3-day long thing.
Right.
It was incredibly vulnerable. And the first, I think, initial part of it was just like recognition of like, I'm in that category. How is that possible? I've never once considered myself to be part of that category. And then immediately, like, why am I so upset about that? And realizing just like how much shame is mixed up with all of those things of like, just like you were saying, if you don't fit this image of all of these different stimuli that we're getting, something's wrong with you. Which is completely untrue.
It just makes me crawl.
Yeah. And it was I mean, that's a thought that occurs to me a lot, just of like a lot of growth that I still have to do around ableist privilege and that kind of thing, which could be an entire topic unto itself. But
what do you mean? But what is it? Sorry, go. Will you say that last part about kids?
I was just gonna say, like, kids absorb everything, like we've been saying, and the shaming messages, even the littlest things, those cut really deep, especially when those are the first introductions that you have to a new idea or a new concept.
Right. When that's, because what just popped into my mind was like first impressions stick, right? So if that's your first impression to a particular emotion, that's going to stick, and that's dangerous. To say, if a child is sad, to tell a young boy not to cry, or tell a girl she needs to clean herself up, those just ideologies are so obsolete. They're killing people now. It's killing people. I'll talk to anybody about what I just said. I'll say it again. The indoctrinating children with oppressive ideas like that, don't feel what you're feeling because you won't fit in, is killing people. I'm just going to say that because, I think about Grady. He went to rehab 4 times before he died, and nobody knew.
Yep.
Nobody knew. Because to say, hey, this is what I'm going through, feels worse than actually going through it, because of how much we're just programmed. Just like you said, mental illness was listed as a disability. That doesn't make any sense. Not anymore. It never did. I don't think it. I'm just kind of checking in with myself. I feel upset by that, and I feel a little worked up. So
yeah, no, that's the reaction I had too. But again, that's, when you look at that in the larger sense of like other things that we consider to be disabilities, like there is no shame in any of that. There should not be shame in any of that. But it doesn't fit the zeitgeist of what is best, and therefore it's bad or worse. Yeah. And so to me, like now, again, with almost 10 years since that experience and like literally thinking about it constantly, I understand it now of like why it would fit into that place. But again, like those feelings of shame and that feeling of like getting worked up, I absolutely encourage you to like stick with that and think through that later and like why you're feeling that way. Cause to me, it was all of those messages of like having a disability makes you weak or less than, or, all the slew of negative words. There were never any positive words associated with that when we were growing up, at least. Right. And that's starting to change in the vernacular, which is positive, but it's still so much to have to unlearn. And I think mental health definitely falls into that of like, we have to be able to talk about things. We have to be able to know that like, this is a human experience and all human experience is valid. Yeah. Well, and talking about things truly is the first step, because I think like, just like you said, growing up, I didn't even know how to describe what I was feeling. It was just, there was no foundation for it because it was so kind of tucked away into the realm where people don't, I always thought of and the stigma around mental health, as soon as you say mental health, people just take it to a very negative place. It's almost like, ew, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that, because people have associated mental health, or even just the term, with things like lack of character, poor judgment, poor decision making. That's not correct. There's much, much more to that.
So that's why we're here, is to literally just create those conversations and show people that it's possible to have these conversations without blowing up or look, we're still here. Like, we're still functioning, we're still going to go out and help people. Like, and yeah, I cried myself to work the other day. And it's not because I'm of poor moral character or, I'm lacking. I'm not lacking. I was just feeling a lot.
Yeah.
That's the thing. We feel a lot. And in this day, compared to 20 years ago, we have much greater access to things that hurt. So, we grew up still in a time where we had to, dial up internet. We had to wait, oh, I have to wait 3 minutes to get online. What is this? Just sit a group of test subjects down now and be like, okay, you're going to test out the latest and greatest brand new internet. It's called dial-up and it's super fast. And you just sit. I would love to just see their faces as it's dialing up. And then they're like, wait, so I think a couple things have converged into sort of a dangerous state of affairs. We have more access to more information, which can be an amazing thing and is a good thing in the connectivity of it. More people have more access to more information, but we have more access to really negative things too. We have more access to hate speech, all kinds of things. And kids are now exposed to it from a very young age, where they can kind of, for a large part, pick and choose where they want to go and what they see. And they're developing basically in just a very, very, very intense state of positive, but mostly negative stimuli, because negative stimuli is, well, they call it clickbait, but there's also the phenomenon where it's easier to get people to rally about something they don't like than to rally about something they do like. It's easier to bring people together in a negative way than it is to bring people together in a positive way. That's why we have to do what we're doing, because there's so much negativity associated with looking in, like we were talking about, just to be able to stop and ask the question, what is this feeling in me right now? How is this feeling affecting my physical body? Where is this feeling in my body? Is this stress a gigantic knot in my stomach? How is that fueling my interaction with my loved ones, with people on the road, with people in the grocery store? How are these emotions affecting my decision making? These are the things that we need to start talking about and start letting people know that it's okay to explore and look at, because I feel like that's what we were missing growing up. Even just some kind of framework to ask, like, what is this feeling? And that's big for me. Like, where is this feeling in my body? Because a lot of my stress, a lot of the feelings of like unworthiness and shame that I've had, like, group up in my stomach, and I just have this knot. And when I get really stressed, I lose my appetite, and then I don't feel like I have enough energy. And then, so maybe I'll drink some caffeine or something, but then I'm not sleeping as well. And then I'm sleep deprived, which is causing me more stress. And if I walk into a room if I walked into a room in high school and rose, the teacher called on me or something, I rose my hand and I said, ma'am, I've been experiencing sleep deprivation, because my parents keep screaming at each other, and I'm not feeling totally myself. And I feel like I've had kind of a steady progression of behavior that's further negatively affected me. And for some reason, I just feel really anxious, like I'm going to throw up every time I walk into your classroom. And I don't like this person next to me because they're literally calling me names and gossiping about me to their friend next to them. And all of this stuff is going on. What would the teacher do? Like back when we were kids, their jaw would drop and they'd be like, why don't you go to the nurses?
Yeah.
Right. Let me sweep you under the rug. Or, kids, shield your eyes and ears, you're going to get goop on you. But it's like, now you look at, all those things that go into just what we call, go, be nice on your first day of school, walk tall, put your shoulders back. And, oh, by the way, don't feel anything. You're not allowed to bring anything home, have a good day. But I just look at how that's manifested into people's behavior as they've grown. And now I feel like I can, on any given day, I can go to any store, any parking lot, I can talk to any person, and somebody's going to be angry. Somebody's going to be just spewing venom in every direction. Because when we just hold all this stuff in over time, that's what we're full of. And I think the dangerous part about that is, this is something from my experience, is if we tell ourselves something long enough or make a certain behavior okay for long enough, I started to believe that that's all there was. I actually started to have a really knee-jerk reaction to basically society, because I was like, everyone's out to hurt me. Everyone's out to step on my back to get to where they want to go. No one is trustworthy. And that's completely not true. I think it's just a matter of paying attention to how long we're absorbing stimulus, because we are sponges, and especially as kids. So yeah, how long and what type of stimulus are we absorbing? Because at a certain point, we're going to believe that that's all there is. And we will just behave that way. Because another thing is, I've seen a lot of behavior from people that they don't even know they're exhibiting, because to them, it's 100% normal. That's just the status quo. They're used to screaming at the people they love, because that's the environment they grew up in. I'll beat you, my child, but then come here and let me hold you. You're safe with me. I'm the only one that can protect you. That kind of thing. And then I think one stage for me was, I started just realizing that I was behaving in all the ways that I hated the most growing up. Like all the behavior I saw in people that I didn't like, I was doing that. I had become that. And that scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, you're making me think of how obviously there's an individual piece to all of this, right? And knowing yourself well enough to know what sets you off, if it's a word or an action or a space or a sound or whatever, that's one piece of it. And knowing your own stuff and working through that. But there's also this collective piece. And I'm hopeful that with each generation, we're getting closer to normalizing that emotions are okay and that we are supposed to have them, or else we wouldn't have them, because that's how we're wired and that's how our brains work. But I mean, your example of if you had gone into class and been very openly honest about where you were at that day, what would the teacher do? There, the generations before us, they had even less tools to work with to figure out their own stuff, or didn't even have the time to, do the self-work piece of it. And so of course things are going to get passed down, and you mimic the things that you grew up with, as you were kind of describing, and you can internalize those things, and then you pass that down to the next generation. And I think obviously where we're at right now, we're starting to get to this place where our peers and people our age are talking about this somewhat more. People are seeking out therapy more regularly, which is great. And then I work with high school students. And so even seeing their approach to things and their ability to just say things more upfront, even though it's still a struggle, they're far more open about it than we would have been able to be in high school.
Right.
And so I think it's happening, which is a good thing. And I think younger generations are kind of fighting back against those things because it bleeds into all parts of life. And I think they're seeing those things. Like work environments, for example, I think are going to change, I hope are going to change drastically. But the idea that you can't bring emotions into work, or you can't bring what's happening at home into work or school, we do still kind of tell kids that is, that makes no sense. That you can't just separate pieces of yourself and then function as a whole adult.
Right. Yeah.
So like vulnerability has to be accessible everywhere that we go. Like vulnerability at work is something I've been thinking about a ton right now with just like team dynamics and people having had the hardest work year of their lives through the pandemic, and how we never just like stopped to acknowledge like, hey, this crazy thing is happening in the world. Obviously that's going to impact your ability to do your job in various ways, and that's okay. And instead it was just like, nope, business as usual. Like, let's just keep moving. But it was because we didn't have the tools, and all of us were conditioned to be like, we aren't allowed to talk about this stuff in a professional setting. And like, actually, when you do talk about those things, you feel more connected to people. You feel less pressure. You feel like, I'm not in this on my own. I'm not the only one who like doesn't feel like they're not killing it every day.
Right.
And it makes it better, and it makes people more comfortable, which can increase productivity. Like kind of the opposite of what you were saying of like, this negative action then leads to all these other negative actions. This one positive action can lead to all these other positive actions.
Yes. Oh, that makes my chest feel good. Like a big gush of wind, flew right into me. And I love what you said about connectedness. I think we have an idea of what we think connectedness is today, through media, social media and all that jazz. But I don't think that's actual connectedness, because we can put a facade on. We're connecting through a filter. We're connecting through a fake lens, if you will, or a specifically chosen lens. Not necessarily a raw lens. So, and it brought up a memory of mine, because my history of mental health is linked pretty intimately with substance abuse. And, a lot of people's ours, not everybody's is, mine is, but I remember reading about a study that they did it was, for anyone who knows this study I'm talking about, forgive me if I don't get it 100% correct, but it was something like an insane asylum, or a place where they put the people they didn't want, or people who were addicted to things. And what they found was when it was like when a inmate or someone that was in there did something, air quote, bad, or behaved like they were used to, that was deemed negative, they were isolated. So they were put in isolation, and they were cut off from everyone else, and they were scolded. You're bad. You're wrong. This is not okay. You're bad. You're wrong. This is not okay. And it just made them worse. It made them completely worse. Like, it drove them so hard into that behavior that it just made them worse. What didn't make it worse was when they weren't isolated, when they were actually put back in their group and accepted in that behavior. Because the second they weren't demonized for that, they were able to lift their own head above water enough to look at it and say, okay, I'm still here with this. I'm not gone. I'm not lost. I'm right here. And I have to look at this, but it gives them the second that they need to breathe in order to look at it. And I think connectedness like that can come from being genuine and wearing these things on our sleeves and just functioning like that. You know, that's something that I tell people is, hey, if I'm angry, you know it. If I'm sad, you know it. If I'm happy, you know it. There is no unspoken law with me. And the people who have said, hey, I love this about you, Ryan, but I don't like this, I can't talk to anymore. Because just like society, when we're told that we have to shut part of ourselves off or make part of ourselves small, what is that doing to us inside? It makes me more guilty to shut part of myself off because now I feel like I'm lying. Because I'm functioning in this half tilted space where I'm constantly running this check. Is that okay? Is that okay? What are they thinking of you? What are they thinking of you? Is that okay? Did you do what they want? Did you do what will make them like you? Do they like you? Oh, fuck, they don't like you, dude. Be better. You know,
Yeah.
and that monkey mind going on just in me, I'll break the house down, just freaking out on myself. Now put me in a group of people. Oh, let's call it a city. Oh, let's all do it together. Oh, why is no one getting along?
Well, yeah, and I think it's there's two sides to that equation, right? It's like one, being your authentic self and not getting yourself wrapped up in that monkey mind. And it's going to, people are going to react to that because we're all reacting to everything. And so on the one side, it's the person who is reacting is the piece of it that belongs to them is, why am I reacting that way? What is this person saying or doing that is escalating something in me that I need to look at? And then on the other side is, if you're the person doing the thing, even if that's your authentic self, there is a space to, if it's hitting somebody in the wrong way, what about that is hitting them in the wrong way? Is it solely something that like they need to look at, or is there something that like maybe I can adjust without losing my authenticity? Or, you know, like a gap in knowledge that I need to fill or think about a little bit more, you know, like it has to go both of those ways. But if those two people can't talk about it and say like, okay, I reacted this way because of my shit from whatever.
Right.
And then you being able to say like, oh yeah, okay, I realized that like I was also in my feelings or emotions and like I came at this really strongly for this reason.
Right.
It's like, A, okay, you both understand each other better, so that's good. And then B, there's some level of self-reflection going on there for both people involved. And so like maybe the next time it'll just go better with the next person. But it's, if both people aren't willing or able to do that, then both people walk away not knowing what happened or what was wrong with that interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. It made me think too, you know, when I, getting back to the term, you know, mental health and just things that trigger people in certain ways. One of the reasons that I used to be triggered by the term mental health and I'd cringe was because the thoughts and emotions that I was feeling that I personally associated with mental health were really negative. They were of immense and sudden loss. They were of deep shame in myself and guilt for not being better and, you know, saving my parents' relationship. And, you know, so my association with mental health was really negative, which made me have a really strong reaction with expressing any of it because it brought it all up. And what I just realized was over time in my personal journey, when I started talking about the things that hurt, because really what happened was I drove so hard and so fast into my life the way I thought I needed to be, that actually life, like I derailed. My train came off the tracks and life was like, oh, actually, no.
Yeah.
You're going to stop and slow down because this is what's going on. So when I started expressing, you know, actually what was going on with me, what happened was my idea of mental health went from this really narrow vision of negativity to this much broader scope, because I started talking about the things that hurt, and which allowed me, just like you said, to start processing the things that hurt, rebuilding my relationship with the things that hurt and memories. And then when my idea of mental health became bigger, I started looking not at the things that I felt negatively impacted my mental health, but just like you said, all the things that positively impacted my mental health. And now when I talk about mental health, a large part of it is positive things. You know, like just this morning, I woke up and I looked out the window and I saw the sun rising. And in that moment, I personally felt really small, because I thought, and I was looking out at such an immense sky. I felt small, but not in a bad way, in a humble way.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at the colors. They felt soft on my eyes. I think of all the things I look at and see day to day that feel sharp, that feel pokey, that feel angry. You know, those colors felt soft to me. They relaxed my mind. My shoulders softened. My jaw relaxed. That's an example of how a beautiful stimulus, like watching a sunrise, positively impacts mental health.
Yeah.
Mental health is the full spectrum. Mental health isn't just the negative stuff. I think we've just gone so long that it's really, really pent up.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to pull the plug, because it doesn't stay this way. The beginning of the journey might be a very steep climb, but what people need to know is that it doesn't stay that way. You get up on the ridge, you get up on the saddle of your own mountain of emotions, and you get up there, and all of a sudden you can see out past it. You can see beyond all the, you got to the part that seemed so hard. It's not just continuing to go up. You look out and you see that there is so much more. Mental health is all of it. It's what hurts, but it's also what makes us happy. When you say mental health, it's simply like putting a tire pressure gauge up to your tire. How full is my tank? You know, I want people to think of it like that, not, ooh, you said a Voldemort word. Now I'm angry, and don't go there. And by the way, I don't like you anymore for doing this to me, for making me feel this way. How dare you bring this up? Mm-hmm. It's like, bring what up? How you're feeling? Wait, weren't you already experiencing that? Oh, okay. You want to hold on to it? Well, hold on. No, I care about you. Let's not hold on to it. Like, let's talk about it, but yeah, I forgot where I was going with that, but I think just the sunset or the sunrise, it's like mental health is more than just what makes people cringe. And I think that's important for people to know, and there's always a way out of what we might not want to be in. And most often that path is through.
Yeah, I think it's, mental health is part of health. Like your overall health includes your mental health. And I guess what gets sticky with me is everyone's health journey is different. And I think the vast majority of the time, like you're saying, you can get through it. There are steps to get there. They're all going to be unique to you, and you have to figure out what works for you. But there's also, chronic illnesses, and there are things that if the stuff isn't working, that everyone's telling you to try, that still doesn't mean there's something bad with you. You don't, you would never blame a cancer patient for having cancer.
Right.
Right. And so there's, again, it's like those shaming things of like mental health somehow doesn't count as an illness in a lot of ways. And people are like, well, there's always help and there's always like, just get over it or, you know, whatever. It's like, no, it needs to be treated. It needs to be, there's a process that you have to go through to heal from it. And it's not going to be terminal for most people. But there also needs to be space in the conversation to talk about like, what can we, I guess, for people who are in a place where it's, you know, contemplating ending their life, for example, like there's so much shame around that as well. And this idea, like one of my big triggers is like hearing anybody say that like suicide is selfish is like, that's a non-starter for me.
Yeah.
Especially if you've never been in that place, you have no idea what those thoughts are, how much that takes over your body completely. And so it's super hard because obviously like you would never want that for anybody, but it's also not up to the outside world. And so like the outside world also can't put the shame on the person who's in that place. Right.
Yeah. Because whose shame is that?
Right. And why this thought keeps recurring to me, and like this is not a fully formed thought, so I'm not sure where this is going to go, but throughout this conversation today, this running theme that I keep thinking about is the part that love plays in all of this. And I think one part of it is for the outside world, if that's the world at large, or if that's like your immediate community, your immediate family structure, whatever, those outside influences, especially the ones that are closest to you, are probably operating from a place of love as they know it best.
Right. That's big.
Even in that choice of trying to show this person how much you love them, it might cause more damage to the person who's experiencing it. Which is so hard because we all want to take care of the people that we love. We all want to be in the happy part of life, in the happy part of mental health. And it's scary when someone's not in that place. It's scary.
Right.
And when we get scared, we react in ways that, you know, we kind of go to our own go-tos, and that's not necessarily what that person needs. And so it gets just really tricky of this whole conversation. It's like, there's pieces of it where like, there's a total lack of love and there's a total lack of empathy and regard for how other people are feeling. And then on the other side of it, it's like, when you love somebody so much, either you take on what they're feeling and then that puts you in a darker place, or you love somebody so much and they're really struggling and you're trying to help them, and really that's making them withdraw more. And so what do you do with that piece, I think, is what I'm kind of sitting with. It's just like, love is such a positive emotion to feel towards somebody, and it can cause a lot of pain if we don't understand that person.
Right. And that is a big question, because we have almost what are like opposing fronts, you know, and I see that a lot in the past couple generations where, you know, our parents genuinely they were trying to do their best. You know, they were trying to do what they thought was best for us. And I see a lot of that behavior manifesting in they basically force us into something that they think will make us succeed, because that makes them feel safe, like they did a good job, or that was the opportunity that they didn't get to have. So their idea of the best job they can do is ensure that we get that opportunity. Now that intersects with that, you know, the opposite side of that, where that love is actually can smother someone or take that person out of the equation.
Right. Well said. Yes.
because then, well, I just want what's best for you. Well, mom and dad, I don't want to be a fucking doctor. I want to go work with horses. So to get back to that question, like, what do we do? Because there's also a feeling of responsibility and guilt associated with not accepting what we see as someone's love in their capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you kind of get to a point where, if you reject that, they're going to take it as a complete rejection of them.
Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with, is this intersection of awareness around how do we really love the people that we love, because that's dependent on them. Which brings me back to the point of, what do we do? First, we have to be aware of what's going on in us.
Yes.
In order to understand how other people's behavior is affecting us. And only then can we meet them on a bridge to try to share that. Mm-hmm. But then they have to also meet us on the bridge. So getting back to the generational gap, the past couple generations were not, or did not have the time, or whatever the reasons were, to learn how to use the tools to understand how they were feeling in order to show up on the bridge in that genuine, vulnerable fashion. It manifested more in behaviors like, oh, I can relax once I'm a successful business owner. Mm-hmm. Or, oh, I can relax once I'm in this relationship. And then it was just like, okay, it's like the idea of, once you fall in love with someone, that's all you need for the relationship to work. That's not the whole picture.
Right.
We have all these wonderful romantic love movies about love is all you need. But then the question is, well, why do I keep falling in love with dumpster fires? Like, love isn't all you need in order to have a functioning, healthy relationship. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we have this huge emphasis on, well, I'm doing this because I love you. Well, yeah, but you don't know who I am. Mm-hmm. I don't even know who I am. And I'm pretty sure you don't know who you are either. So what now does that love even mean? Because it feels like you're just shoving your hand into my throat. Yeah. And I know that that's you loving me, because that's what most likely you received. But again, it just goes back to, like, even knowing that you've got somebody's hand in your mouth, that's kind of a weird example. I think of my bosses in construction, where they want to come in and, I better stop what I'm doing immediately and entertain their presence 100%. And they're always going to have something to say. Oh, am I holding the tool backwards or upside down, or not the way you do it? Wow. They want to make sure I'm doing the best job. But really what they're telling me is how they feel safe behaving.
Yes.
And we can't mass apply one set of rules for everyone to stick to and expect that everyone's going to flourish in that environment.
Yeah.
Pure and simple. We have to be aware of ourselves first. It reminds me of when I was in my third college, where I actually got my degree. I studied group dynamics, leadership, sustainability, and wilderness ethic. And that became one of my deepest passions, is philosophy. These questions of, like, what do we do? What do we do? Like, you can go out and find 100 answers to all the problems right now, but none of them actually, they're all, a lot of them are band-aids. Like, what do we actually do with all the people on Earth? How do we get everyone to work together? I love questions like this. I love tackling ideas like this, because society wants to cut it up and narrow your vision, which makes it more difficult to figure out why everything feels so big, because we are connected to a bigger picture. And I forgot why I started talking about awareness. Yes, being aware. The one question that was proposed in sustainability was, of course, how do we save the world? You know, our ice caps are melting, we're flooding, we're on fire, bugs are growing, we're going to have locust swarms and death and plague and war and the apocalypse, right? So what's the one idea that's going to solve if everybody turns their sink off right after brushing their teeth, is that going to solve the world? We wish, but the truth is there isn't one answer.
Right.
Just like you said, there's not one answer for any given problem. And if you want to have any effect on the future, or to create any amount of change in the face of such immensity, the only thing we can actually do is embody those changes. Because we're in the paint right now. As a society, we are hard in the paint. We have been driven into the mud for enough generations now where we're having a reckoning of our own ability to cope with being alive and doing that together.
Yeah.
So the first step is if we want to see change in the world, or what do we do with these generational ideas of love, if we want to understand that and see how we play into that, we have to understand that within ourselves, and we have to embody the behavior that we want and hold on tight and hope that trickles on to someone and makes a difference in someone's life, so that becomes their normal. Just like you said, with the future generations, it's becoming more normal for them to talk about what's going on. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's going to save a lot of people. But that's one thing that's stuck with me since we talked in the park, was about family specifically. And just, the immensity and weight that we carry from our mothers and fathers, from our older siblings. One example that I know ate my dad up and just tore him up, but he never really knew what to do with it. So not knowing what to do with it, it just manifested in his behavior.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of time, negative emotions, sadness, pain, grief, guilt, manifest physically. When my dad was 18 or so, he went to his father, my grandpa Joe, and my dad told my grandpa that he wanted to be a jeweler. My dad wanted to be a jeweler. He loved art and he wanted to be a jeweler. And my grandpa called him gay and kicked him out of the house. And he said, no son of mine will be some gay person who likes art. My grandpa was a social worker for the Catholic Church. And my dad internalized that and tucked it so deep that he took it out on himself. He would hurt himself. He would chain smoke cigarettes. Cigarettes are addicting, sure. But you know what's more addicting? Sadness, grief, guilt, shame. Those are such potent emotions. And going back to, if we're raised in that, my dad was 18 when that happened. He was still young enough to internalize that as he wasn't accepted in the world. Yeah. So he never felt safe. He never felt at home being himself. Yeah, I think what I realized for myself in the last 3 or 4 years the most was understanding the words that I had come to define myself by.
were not words that I initially assigned to myself. Those were words that other people had assigned to me.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had like internalized it so deeply that I thought it was my idea to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of that does come from family and from parents and grandparents, and how the people who raise us, you know, like they're, again, going through their own understanding of self, hopefully, or if they're not, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like those are big gaps to fill.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I got to this place where I felt like if I did one thing that I was supposed to do, that then shut down an authentic part of who I was.
Ooh.
And so, for example, I'll say with like femininity, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an idea that I do, you know, there's a lot of generational baggage that comes along with gender norms.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of being raised to be a strong, independent female who is intelligent and is able to say what they think and not let people who are intimidated by that get in my way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was taught all of those things. And I do think that those are an authentic part of my personality.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, that translated to not also being able to be soft and vulnerable and feminine. And so when I would do one of those things, if I did speak my mind and people didn't react to it particularly well or whatever, then it was like, great, I'm being empowered and I'm doing my thing. And it was super isolating because I wasn't fitting into this. Part of it is fitting into the norm, but another part of it is like, I also feel that I do feel those normed stereotypes, I guess, some of those are authentic to me in certain instances as well. And so it's really confusing when you're doing what you think you're supposed to do. People don't react well to that. And you also feel like you isolated yourself at the same time.
Ooh.
I think perfectionism is another one for me. That was a word that was sort of assigned to me early on that I've had to really work through and realize, like, that's not my word for me. What that means to other people for me actually is like being driven, having high expectations for myself and trying to do my best. And there's definitely been points in my life where like I've taken that too far and that has turned into a really negative thing. But it was because I was defining it as perfectionism, and therefore if it wasn't perfect, it was a problem. And so those are two different things. Being driven and being perfect are not equivalent.
Yeah.
And so a high school example I can say is like, getting good grades was a value in our family. It was how I was taught that like I could get into college, that college was the way that I was going to be successful. And there is truth to that. So I would try really hard. And so if I didn't get an A on something, it felt like the end of the world to me. And then at the same time, it was like, well, you just need to like calm down and relax. And like, it's not that important. Like, so I was getting these mixed messages of, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get an A. Okay, well, I didn't get the A and now I'm upset. Don't be upset. It's not a big deal.
Right.
And so those two things, again, don't mesh.
Right.
And so being in that constant phase of like, okay, well then what, if nothing that I do is the right thing, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, didn't you also say too, when you did get that A and you slammed it out of the park, you also weren't allowed to get too excited, right?
It was,
Because they're
well,
like, don't be boisterous, don't be proud, don't be, or
yeah, I mean, the messages that you get and is, I don't know that I would say that came directly from my parents necessarily. That might be a bigger like
Mhm.
societal thing. But yeah, like
Mhm.
you're not supposed to celebrate your successes either. And so it's like, okay, I'm gonna like quietly do this thing that's actually a really positive thing for me
Mhm.
and not talk about it.
Mhm.
And then I'm also not gonna talk about the things that are not going well.
Mhm.
And then you just like live in this middle space of mediocrity and like an unfulfilled self.
Yeah. What, when you were in that place, that kind of like floating void,
Mm-hmm.
what did you find there that made you feel like you weren't floating in a void?
Say more.
So that question, I feel, comes from my personal experience of, there was an event in my life where I, all of a sudden, it just felt like everything was stripped away from me. Everything that I had been proud of or hiding from people was immediately just blown out into the wind, and everyone could see every part of me, every part that I wanted them to and every part that I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was completely floating in a void. And so my question is, what happened then? Like, what was there something that started making you feel like you did know what was okay for you to feel? Or how did you get your bearings in that place?
Oh, it's definitely not a single event,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
which I think is what makes it hard,
mm-hmm,
is because there's, when you were saying floating, I'm thinking of like, I'm visioning these like anchors
mm-hmm,
dropping down. You're like,
mm-hmm,
okay, like this is a solid place where I can like, I know that I can go back to
mm-hmm.
and like feel solid.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so it's little things at first for me, at least it was saying, it really started with just like saying yes to things I was interested in.
Uh-huh.
So one of those things I would say in high school, well, when like things were that's hard, the hardest that they were,
Mm-hmm.
was, oh, my mom's friend invited us to a backyard party to hear this woman speak about, for a fundraiser.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she was from Kenya and it was about education. And I was like, that sounds interesting. Sure, I'll go.
Mm-hmm.
Not anything groundbreaking as far as the like, what am I going to do with my Sunday afternoon type decision.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. So I'll say yes.
Mm-hmm.
That one choice turned into us partner, like our high school partnering with this nonprofit organization and sponsoring a student to go to college, which got me an invitation to come speak at an international peace conference in Kenya when I was 19.
What?
And that partnership is still happening. They're sponsoring, I think, like their 5th student through school right now. Whatever, 12, 13 years later or something like
Wow.
that. And it was really, and then all of those experiences that I had within that, like that influenced a lot of decisions I made in college. Those decisions led me to South America for a little while,
Mm-hmm.
met some incredible people there. That led me into teaching. Like all of those things are those individual choices that then like lead you to the next thing.
Right.
And when you're in it, you don't see that as a big deal.
Right.
It's only when you have distance from it and you can see the full timeline or the full bird's eye view
Right.
that you start to put those pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in a general answer to that question is, I started making small decisions that felt authentic to me and not asking other people about it.
Yeah.
And then through that and through you know, like treatment therapy, like, you know, the other pieces of healing yourself, getting to a place where it wasn't so scary to look at myself anymore and to look internally. And then that provided the space to say like, okay, I can now recognize, to what you were talking about earlier, of like, when I feel that knot in my stomach, why am I feeling it? What specifically is that? And then you're just kind of getting tools along the way that get you to a place where you can then just like snap into that immediately of like, oh, I feel myself reacting this way. Let me take a breath. What's going on? And then if that requires something deeper and, you know, kind of going all the way in there, and that's a process that takes a lot of time in and of itself, then you at least know to do that. Or sometimes now a lot of things are just like an immediate switch for me, just like, oh, I can feel myself escalating. Let me stop. What did that person just say? Why am I reacting that way? And then like either talk to them about it or be able to let it go. Cause I'm like, oh, okay, I don't need to take that on.
Right.
That's not for me.
Two things that really struck me about that I love is, one, it becomes a practice, because our emotions, you know, you don't get all strong and muscly after one day at the gym. I'd love it if that was possible. I'd go to the gym once.
Yeah, we all would.
But if you want strong muscles, you have to continuously work them out. And you start small. You start small and you work your way up. The other part is kind of so it's like what to do versus kind of the pressure coming from the other end is there's this idea and this desire for quick fixes. Like I would love if I could just think one thought and solve it all, or do one thing and solve it all. But it's not like that either. There isn't just one thing you can do. And that's an important thing for people to know, is that if it feels really big at the start, that's because it is really big at the start. Because it's like the first time you pick that weight up, you know, you haven't worked your arm out in forever. You haven't worked your emotions out in whatever. It's going to feel huge, but you got to keep doing little bits at a time. And I loved what you said about choosing things that were interesting to you and not telling anybody else. Because what my mind said too was not asking anyone else for permission.
Right.
Not looking to others to validate my decisions in doing something that interests me. My childhood and my experience as a child manifested in me becoming a people pleaser, to the point where I would covet making sure that other people were happy over how I felt. And one thing that I started doing in my journey was having silent successes. When I had some kind of success growing up, I would immediately go share it with somebody. I would blow it up to as many people as I could, because the success didn't feel good, because I wasn't used to feeling like I was deserving of success. But from my childhood, what I associated with success was when somebody told me good job. So I'd go give away all of that energy to hear someone tell me that what I did was a good job.
Yeah.
And what I was able to do for myself was take a few moments, you know, and I remember reading it online or something about just take these moments to yourself. And when I accomplished something that I was proud of, it was hard at first, but I didn't call anybody. I didn't tell anybody. I remember, you know, I drove home from like a wrestling match one time, and I had won a medal, you know, for just winning my age or weight bracket or whatnot. And I didn't call anybody. I just sat there and looked at the medal, and it was interesting because all of my old self was like, nobody knows, which makes this not important. But deeper inside me, I felt like it had planted a little seed of strength in me. That little accomplishment was a little seed in me. And then I was like, oh, I didn't give it away. I didn't just go give it away to everybody. I have it in me. Yeah. And then I kept planting those seeds. And just like you said, over time, it became easier to trust myself to find the things that I'd fall in love with, or that interested me, or I was passionate about. I love that. Yeah. You start with little things, and even something, because like earlier, the term depression came up, and we throw the terms depression and anxiety around very commonly now. But one of my questions is like, well, what does depression look like for you? What does depression look like for me? Because it's this big thing. But for me, I know now, just like you said, in retrospect, looking back, because in it, I thought I was near death or something, or I thought I was just lost and out of chances. But the way I felt was, it was like the world had gone gray, dark gray.
Yeah.
Food didn't taste very good. I didn't feel excited about anything. It was like I had lost the ability to be excited. I didn't feel like I could feel hope for anything. I just felt like my depression felt like I had come to the conclusion, I had figured out that the world is just a gray, tasteless, soundless place. I never thought I'd be in a relationship that would make me happy again. And that was my depression. It was just the world went gray, and I had ash in my mouth.
Yeah.
And something so, I'm air quoting, simple as, because I hear people say, oh, well, why don't you go, do something you love, go look at a tree, or, go to the mountains or something. And it was like, why on earth would that help me when everything feels so big? But it seemed like a small matter at the time, but truly, even asking myself, well, what does feel interesting to me? That muscle in me, that emotional muscle, had gotten so atrophied that even asking myself that took repetition.
Yeah.
I had to continue to ask myself, well, wait a minute, is that interesting? I'd have these little flickers of feeling, oh, whoa, I felt like my heart smiled for a second there, but now it's gone. Well, what was that? I was, looking into like a flower store or something, or like, like a drum circle down in Denver or something like that, or church even. I was like, just these little flitters. And just like you said, once you start to follow that path, and that, we use the term genuine and authentic. Well, what do those mean? It can mean something so seemingly little as, what? That made me smile. I haven't smiled in a long time. I'm going to just walk closer to that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go say hi to that person and just say thanks. That doesn't feel like it's going to do anything in my gray world, but I did it. And then it's like that first day at the gym.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, whoa, everything wants to snap back. You wake up the next morning and you're like, oh, but then you do it again and it gets easier. It gets easier. And the more you allow yourself the space and you accept yourself, to give yourself the chance to entertain the idea that you are capable of being interested in something, that you are capable of falling in love again. You give yourself that chance. Now you're working out with your head above water. Now your chest will rise up, and now your both arms, and now, just like you said, it gets quicker and quicker to the point where you're, somebody calls and says, hey, you want to go do this thing on this day? And you're like, that's exactly what my mind, body, and soul wants to do on that day with you there, then, or if you're alone, whatever. It's a process. Giving yourself the chance builds your skill in understanding yourself.
Yeah. I'm loving how much you're connecting this to body right now. Cause just like we were talking about before, like if you can get to a point where you can recognize the physical manifestations of the negative things that you're feeling, like the not in your stomach, not feeling like you want to eat, not sleeping well, that kind of stuff. Like
I don't feel like
the other part is true. Yeah. Just like you're saying, of like the things that feel good to you. For me, you described it as like, oh, that made my heart feel happy. Like, I'm going to go walk towards that. I love that. Amazing. For me, it's tricky because it's subtle. but I didn't have to spend that much energy on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't feel tired after doing that thing. And I feel content and I feel calm. So it's not that I'm like, oh, that was the most amazing thing that I've ever done. But I'm just like, oh, I feel centered fully in myself.
Yeah.
And that just means like nothing extra is going on. I'm just here and I'm present and I'm existing within my own body.
Yeah.
And there aren't things floating around in my head or trying to like analyze anything. It's a very calm state for me.
I love that. You know, life, a happy life with fulfillment should be easy. It shouldn't be a struggle. It's not a struggle to have the life you want. It might be a struggle to have the life you think you want at any given time. But just like you said, if it's actually something that interests you and nourishes you, it's going to actually nourish you. And you're going to walk away from it. And yeah, just like you said, it's so subtle in the beginning because you're like, wait a minute, do I feel something? And you're like, actually, what I'm feeling now is simply the lack of being drained.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't walk away from that feeling like less. It was just, that was really nice. It's like, we're so far from just that. You know, it's like, you're not allowed to just live a life where you're happy. But it's like, well, wait a minute. I kind of like a life where I'm happy.
And accepting that you're allowed to want that. That's something that I struggle with for a long time. Still, sometimes I'm just like, I have to remind myself, like, you're, and I think that came out of too, like getting out of high school, kind of like age 20 for me. It was like, I had to relearn how to expect things from my life.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's a weird thing to have to do.
Yeah.
Because you have to be open to things.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put yourself out there to try things.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be in a place where you at least understand, like, we are all worthy of things that bring us joy.
Yes.
But if you don't feel like you are, that's a huge hurdle to overcome.
Yes. Yeah. That, my mind just went back to that idea of connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
If we're feeling something and we're told we're not allowed to, how are we going to move beyond that?
Yeah.
But if we're feeling something and we allow ourselves first, how much more room is there to just function and try to figure it out? Because just if we have an epiphany, it doesn't mean that we're now a master of running the ship. Oh my gosh, like, okay, let's just drop some terms. Oh, spiritual awakening. Okay, I had a spiritual awakening, and then I walked out my front door and went face first into the, concrete because I didn't know how to walk on my new legs. That doesn't mean it didn't work. It means that's your first day at the emotional gym. You're going to look funny, like a baby deer with its little legs, you're like, whoa. But yeah, that's so big. That's huge for me. Just allowing yourself the space to even feel as a beginning point. And my mind went back to that question, that running theme of what do we do? Ultimately, what do we do? And it reminds me that in any given place we're at, we were born with the ability to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
We, in the face of it all, because, hey, for everyone listening, as well as we do that there's fires going on in the world. There are a lot of wars going on. And we are not going to create change by being submissive to a system that is unwell. We have to make the choice to do something different. We have to simply say, I want something different. And that goes for society, our behavior in society, but it starts within. If you're feeling cut up, and it feels like everything is out of your control, just like we were talking about finding things that are interesting, if you feel like you're out of control, well, what's something you can control? Maybe it's simply you can go take a cold shower, or you can put on your favorite shirt, or you can control your body into drinking a glass of water. It might not feel like you're doing much, but unconsciously doing little actions that create a positive reward, like drinking a glass of water. I did that. I chose to do it. Drinking a glass of water. How inconsequential is that? Well, it's inconsequential until you zoom out and you realize if you feel overwhelmed by everything you think you can't control, or maybe you can't control, because there are things out of our control and there are things that happen. But if when you feel overwhelmed, you say, okay, what can I do? What can I control? And you do that, it creates a positive feedback loop where you can make a bigger choice, and then a bigger choice, and then a bigger choice. I just wanted to say that because I feel like kind of the barrier to entry feels really high for like, going inside and doing internal work, or, whenever I hear these things, it's like, well, how do you do that? It's little things like that. Simply creating your own center of the storm. So yeah, I don't want people to be discouraged by that, because I was discouraged. I was discouraged when I was depressed. It's like hope, you lose hope. It gets really slippery from there, but there is hope, and it just starts you have to make the choice. I feel like I'm stuck on something here. Like I'm caught on something with that thought, in that in the times I've felt the most powerless, if I was able to tell myself that I wasn't powerless, I would just like to tell myself that now. Because even if you don't think it's going to matter, it's mattering.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. Yeah, it's like, how do you fix the world? You start working on the stuff that you feel is broken inside, not what people think is broken inside you, what you think. And you own that. And we don't have to go out and tell everyone yet, because not everyone's there. Mm-hmm. Not everyone's going to take that information and know where it's coming from or what to do with it. So that's why we start with ourselves first. And we can always choose to do something we've never done before. And maybe that's simply saying, okay, I'm going to accept myself right now with what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I had this quote pulled up this morning. Two quotes. Like last night, that poem came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And
Love
then
that, by the way.
Okay, cool. Well, this one, I just pulled this one up this morning, and it's by Albert Einstein. And it says, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. That's Albert Einstein. I think the gift, our gift, is what interests us, what nourishes us. Because we each came into this world with a gift. And it's our job and our responsibility to choose to manifest that gift as hard as we can in the face of it all. Because we're all looking at giants right now.
Yeah. Yep. And I think it is... I'm reflecting on where we started this conversation, and it's really sinking into me that like it is the small things. At least it was for me. Both in how I got into a place that was really unhealthy. Those, it was little things from 10 years old. And then I added more to that. I added more negative things to that, or internalized them, or, life happens, and that's okay. And it doesn't always have to be this huge thing. So if you're somebody who's listening, who's in it right now, and you're not really sure how you got there, I feel that, and I hear that, and I was that too. And it's okay.
Yeah.
And the process of getting out of it is also the small things. For me, it didn't have to be this big thing. It didn't have to be the enlightenment pieces, those like aha moments. For me, that came 10, 12 years later. And I was like, oh, that's what that was.
Yeah.
But it was all those little steps within those 12 years that got me to a place where I could look at it and see it for what it was. And it's hard, and I'm sorry that it's hard, because it takes a long time, but it's doable. And to just trust yourself, like you trust yourself, trust your body. It's gonna tell you when something's wrong. Listen to it. Listen to it when it's telling you what people to be around, and who is safe to ask for help, and who is not who you need in that moment, even if it's someone you feel like you should need in that moment. It's okay. And you're going to have all different kinds of relationships in your life, and people are going to be there for different reasons. So trust yourself to know who you need at which time.
Yeah. This is one of those moments for me where I feel quiet inside and nourished. I feel, my heart just had a good, healthy breakfast. Like that's the space right here.
I love it.
All right. Well, please know from the bottom of my heart, I for the rest of my life, I will feel this desire to just thank you profusely, because I do. And if I have anything to say about it, I'll get ample opportunities to tell you in person.
Yes, I would love that. And it is a mutual feeling. I don't know if it's weird to be proud of you in that we were like just reconnecting, but like, I'm so proud of you that you're doing this. And I'm so thankful that you're doing this, and that you've gotten to this place where you're just sharing who you are as you are, because that's hard. And I'm certainly still learning how to do it. So props to you.
Thank you, Abby.